Welcome to this Malta Airport Foundation talk, and today I would like to welcome here Prof. Deidun, researcher and academic at the University of Malta, to discuss the subject of marine ecosystems, something which is very valid for our nation. So, how large is Malta's marine area and how much of it has been explored yet?
Yes, I would say it's pretty large. In fact, if you had to consider just Malta's territorial waters, which extend to 12 nautical miles from the coast, there are another 14 Malta and Gozo's out there into the sea. Then if you had to consider Malta's fisheries management zone, i.e. where basically Malta's fishers can fish, basically, there's the ratio land to sea is almost 1:40. So there's 40 more Maltas and Gozos out there into the sea. So it's a pretty large area. And luckily, to date, a large chunk of this area, around 35%, so equivalent therefore to around 14 times the size of Malta, is protected within marine protected areas, what we call marine protected areas. So we're protecting an area. It's even difficult to conceive, to visualize when we speak of these large numbers, but we're protecting within marine protected areas an area the size of 14 times our archipelago. So it's massive, it's a massive area, and large parts of this area are so far unexplored. In fact, we have, literally gone around the tip of the iceberg. We have, through a number of EU-funded projects, live projects and so on, which have been completed through sophisticated equipment called ROVs. These cameras which can go down to hundreds and thousands of meters and which can be operated by a man from a vessel, even by means of a joystick, and so on. So yes, there's still much more to explore. So much more to learn about our marine area and to bring to the public in general. I think it's essential in the upcoming decade of the United Nations, which is the United Nations Decade for Ocean Sciences, to bring this, gap in knowledge, to bring it to the public in order to increase our appreciation of the richness of our marine life.
Of course, it's not an easy task to do because of its vastness, of course, but why is it worth conserving our seas? And do we have any particular species that actually thrive in our waters?
This is a very valid question. In fact, the Mediterranean is considered as a biodiversity hotspot, both on land and even in the sea. It's known as a biodiversity hotspot because it has a massive amount of biodiversity, a massive number of species, considering its size, even though we think of the Mediterranean as being a super large area. In reality, it makes up less than 1% of the global ocean. So it's, literally a droplet, considering the world ocean. So it's a small area, but it has up to 8-9% of all the world species. So all the species known from the global ocean are found in the Mediterranean, 8 to 9%, even though the Mediterranean makes up less than 1%. So it's a disproportionate number of species which are found in our seas. That's why it's called the biodiversity hotspot. So, and secondly, a large chunk, around 1/4 of the species found in the Mediterranean, out of these 15,000, are endemic to the Mediterranean.
What does that mean?
Endemic means not found anywhere else. So if we take plants as an analogy, terrestrial plants, because sometimes we tend to understand concepts more if we think of something on land, okay? Widnet al-Bahar, okay? Which is the national plant that is endemic to Malta. So there are about 4,000 to 5,000 species which are endemic in the Mediterranean, not found anywhere else in the world. For example, Posidonia oceanica, our Neptune grass, alca, what we call alca Maltese, not found anywhere else. Pinna nobilis in Nacra, okay, which is not found anywhere else. Unfortunately, at the moment, Nacra, Pinna nobilis populations are plummeting because there is a disease. So in the same way that there is a COVID pandemic for humans, there's also a pandemic which is decimating, Mediterranean populations of Pinna nobilis, which has declined by 99%. So we might lose this iconic species.
And that, of course, has a huge effect on the whole ecosystem, no?
Yes, and besides that, there's also, besides the environmental aspect, there's also the cultural aspect, because this is a species, since it is endemic to the Mediterranean, it is one of those species, which is closely, intrinsically associated with the Mediterranean, which makes up the Mediterranean, character and personality. It has been used in the past to make something known as sea silk. And even when you're diving, when you're snorkeling, you see this bivalve, this massive bivalve, which can grow, reaching over 1.5 meters. So it's massive, it's long-lived, has, quite a long lifetime. So you're losing an important part of your jigsaw. If you consider marine biodiversity as a giant web or a giant jigsaw, this is one of your central pieces. Losing that, it's losing even richness of our seas.
And you mentioned just how many species there are in the Mediterranean. Is this why our waters are so popular with divers?
Yes, our waters are very popular with divers, namely because of the rich biodiversity. And in fact, we've documented these in 2 landmark underwater documentaries, which here I have to thank, obviously, the Malta International Airport Foundation for financing and supporting us at the university to actually produce these 2 landmark documentaries on Filfla and Comino. And when I say landmark, because I gauge the success from the number of views we've had on social media, and even the quality of the filming, which was superb. And even here, I have to thank my co-producers, in fact, Monolith on this. But basically, we have documented a large amount of this biodiversity within these documentaries, and as I was saying, divers come to Malta to sample this biodiversity, to photograph it as well, and our underwater geomorphology. The underwater geomorphology of Malta is stunning. So we speak of landforms, underwater landforms, caves, tunnels, swim-throughs, whatever. So the geomorphology is stunning, as well as the transparency, the visibility, the clear blue waters. In fact, we refer to the Mediterranean as the blue Mediterranean. So I think these are all things we should cherish and strive to protect for future generations.
How have alien species been introduced and how have they impacted our...
Yes, when we speak of alien species, we normally tend to think of species coming from outer space, from Mars, from the moon, but alien species are very real on this planet. Alien species are actually species which travel from one region to the other of the world through human agency. So it's because of human actions, not because they naturally expanded their range and migrated. It's because of human action. Without humans, they would not have moved from one area to another. Take the Suez Canal, which is the biggest shipping canal in the world, which connects the Med to the Red Sea and further afield, Indian Ocean, Pacific Ocean, and so on. As a result of the Suez Canal, we're getting a lot of these tropical aliens from areas further to the east of the Mediterranean, and which are setting shop here, they're reproducing here, setting up viable populations and competing with the native species. Here, in fact, I've brought one of these. This is the blue swimmer crab, which is a massive crab. You might say this is not blue, but it's because it's obviously not living anymore. It's been fixed now, but it's normally blue when it's alive. This is a male, so it's a large species, okay, and it's competing with the natives. And besides that, we're very worried about, not about all aliens, but about a small subset of aliens, the invasives, the invasive alien species. So those 10% of the aliens which spread so much that they start literally competing, with the natives and have a huge impact on our marine environment. And to spread awareness about these alien species, we at the University of Malta are leading 2 important citizen science campaigns. One is called Spot the Alien, and in fact the blue swimmer crab is one of the species listed on our Spot the Alien campaign, which is this one over here. Okay, so we have aliens, could be plants, could be jellyfish, could be worms, could be crustaceans, could be snails, could be sea urchins. So it's not just, fish. And then we have the Spot the Alien Fish campaign. And here I want to underscore the presence of perhaps the most, popular, the most notorious or most feared of all alien fish, which is the lionfish, which is wreaking havoc nowadays in places like the Caribbean and the Gulf of Mexico, and which unfortunately has made it to the Mediterranean as well. It's, it's spreading further west. So it will be in the near future, one of those invasive alien species that we have to manage And entities like ERA, which is the National Responsible Authority for Handling Issues Related with Alien Species, are on the lookout for such species, in fact, So aliens are a very big headache for ecologists, especially the invasives. Again, if I had to use land as an analogy, it would be the Cape sorrel, the hashish anglisa, what we call the hashish anglisa, which is the most common plant on our islands at the moment, in the rainy season, and which is native of South Africa, which was imported about 200 years ago as a weed with citrus trees, So nowadays, we're introducing legislation to make it more and more difficult for these aliens to be imported. It's illegal now to import aliens, but they still make their way through canals, attached to the side of ships, in the ship's belly, as in ballast water, or through the aquarium industry, unfortunately. So if you have an alien, an exotic species at home, think twice before releasing it into the sea, because people might wish to release them because they pity them in closed quarters, but you would actually be, doing a disservice to the marine environment.
So as we've discussed, we can see natural threats to the species already and to our ecosystems. However, man has a huge impact on our seas as well. What are the major threats posed to our seas through the action of humans?
Yes, I would say we cannot have any discussion on marine ecosystems if we ignore the elephant in the room, or the elephant at the airport, because we're at the airport, which is plastic. And primarily microplastic. So that plastic which is 5 millimeters or smaller, and there are two main categories of microplastics. There's the primary microplastics, or nurdles, which are basically the type that they use in factories to mold them into larger plastic. And then there's the secondary microplastics, which are more irregular, as you can see, have heterogeneous, they have different colors and so on and shapes, and which are the result of the degradation of larger plastics. So, as I've said numerous times, I'm not that concerned with the plastic I see in the sea, but it's the smaller particles that we cannot see. So people who are actually engaged and dedicating their entire lives, and here I salute them obviously, to clear the litter, the plastic, and plastic makes up about 80% on average of all the litter in the sea, 80%. An estimated 10 to 30 million tons of plastic end up into the sea each year. So there's this famous prediction that by the year 2050 there will be more plastic in the sea than actual fish. So these organizations which are clearing plastic litter from our seas, obviously they need our support, because you need to remove the plastic from the sea before it actually breaks down into microplastic, because then it becomes virtually impossible to track that plastic and to remove it. So we need to start at the very end of the cycle, of this vicious cycle, and remove it actually even before. Prevent the plastic from, by reducing our dependence on plastic, But if the plastic is in the sea, we need to remove it before it actually degrades. And then there are other impacts besides plastics of human actions, obviously. There's climate change, and the alien species issue is linked with climate change, because aliens have been coming to our seas for a long time, but the Mediterranean used to cool down in winter, so they couldn't manage to overwinter, to survive. But now the Mediterranean is warming up, like all seas around the world. So climate change is not just, its impacts are not just on land, but it affects our marine ecosystems. The ocean is like a giant car radiator. It takes the heat from the engine and takes it to the pole, to the periphery. The ocean works like that. It takes the heat from the tropics and takes it to the North Pole and South Pole. With climate change, we're disrupting this system, this climate control system. So it's anybody's guess what might happen, in future. It's not just alien species, with sea level rise, ocean acidification, So we're disrupting the entire ecosystem. So it's obviously time for urgent action to be taken.
There's also the problem of overfishing.
Overfishing is another important thing, which is leading to big disruptions, like, for example, more frequent jellyfish blooms. We've been observing, jellyfish have been there for 700 million years. So it's not, way before the dinosaurs. But we've been observing in recent years, in recent decades, that jellyfish blooms have become more frequent and more intense. And one theory is that there is too much overfishing, and the Mediterranean, even the Commission, the EU Commission, admits that the Mediterranean is one of the most overfished seas in the world. Once you remove fish out of the equation, jellyfish take over, because jellyfish are much better competitors than fish under stressed conditions. They can survive in conditions of low oxygen, for example, and fish larvae compete with jellyfish for the same food, for crustacean plankton, basically, So yes, overfishing is an issue, and in Malta, 95% of our fishers are artisanal, small-scale fishermen who operate from boats which are smaller than 12 meters. They can no way compete with industrial fishers which are found in other countries and so on. So, I think we have to tackle the issue of overfishing, but at the same time, be careful to support our artisanal fishing, because even FAO, the United Nations, recognizes that small-scale artisanal fisheries is sustainable fisheries. It's not like an industrial type of fisheries. So we have to, intervene, but in a way which supports the responsible, sustainable fisher.
And what is happening at international and European level in this regard?
Yes, the world seems to have woken up to the ocean quite late, that the ocean is important, that two-thirds of the planet is actually, sea, water. That's why we call the blue planet, But finally we made it, the ocean made it to the international agenda. At the United Nations, for instance, at the moment, they're discussing a very important treaty, which has quite a mouthful of a name. It's called BBNJ. It means areas beyond national jurisdiction, biodiversity in areas beyond. Let me explain a bit. It's that biodiversity, species, habitats found at the bottom of the ocean, outside territorial waters, so in no man's land, or let's call it no man's water. Each country has its own part of the sea, 12 nautical miles, territorial waters, okay? Besides that, countries can have an additional portion called exclusive economic zone. But beyond that, in the open, vast ocean, far away from the continents, very few laws apply to protect biodiversity at the seabed. And nowadays, we're moving in an era of seabed mining. So companies can go down to 3,000 meters, not to extract oil and gas, that is already being done, but to extract precious metals, which we use in our mobile phones, in our laptops, and so on. There's a big demand because quarries on land have been exhausted. So we're turning to the sea for our raw materials, for our resources. At the moment, international legislation does not protect habitats and species, vulnerable species, which are found in those areas. So the world is trying to update existing legislation. And Malta, even though we're small, even though we have a large marine area, we are, quite key to these discussions. We had Arvid Pardo, who in 1967 spoke. He was Malta's ambassador to the United Nations and Deputy General Secretary of the UN, who used the term, the ocean, is the common heritage of mankind. And from there, we started thinking of the ocean as a space to protect, He spoke for 3 hours at the United Nations. Few people have been allowed to speak for so long at the United Nations, So even here, Malta now is having a leading role. Remember that Malta is vying for a seat in the United Nations Security Council in 2022. So, ocean governance, this is all part of ocean governance, i.e. we speak of good governance everywhere, but ocean governance is how we manage the sea, the ocean, in a way which is equitable for everybody, for all the countries. It's a bit more tricky than on land, because on land there's boundaries. But in the sea,
everything moves around
exactly.
more freely.
So ocean governance is sacred to Malta, and we're obviously, even though we're small, we're trying to bring our message that we need good ocean governance, even to promote peace, besides environmental sustainability, to bring this forward to the international forum.
That was very interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you for the very valid work you do. Thank you to the Malta Airport Foundation for providing us with these talks as well. See you next time.